So, hey, everybody, this is Mr. Miller. I am here today with Michael Sutphin, who is a town council member from Blacksburg, Virginia. Michael, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing well. So, I wanted to start with just giving you an opportunity to introduce yourself, talk about where you're from, and what your position is there.
Sure. My name is Michael Sutphin. I live in Blacksburg, Virginia, which is the home of Virginia Tech. We've got about 47,000 people live here. It's definitely a college town. There's about 31,000 college students in Blacksburg. I work at Virginia Tech. That's where I went to school for college. I
And where we
majored
met.
in, yeah.
Yeah.
I started out when we were both living in Thomas Hall freshman year. I started off as a computer science major, but about halfway through my college career, switched to communication, where I studied journalism and wrote for the student newspaper. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in communication, and after I graduated, I got a job working for Virginia Tech. And for my first 5 years after graduation, I worked for the College of Ag and Life Sciences, where I was a writer. And then for the past 5 years, I worked for the Veterinary College at Virginia Tech, where I'm the public relations coordinator. But in addition to that, like you mentioned, I'm on the Blacksburg Town Council. I was elected in 2011 in November and finished out my first 4-year term. And then last November, I won re-election. So I'm on my second 4-year term on the Blacksburg Town Council.
So, for our students, we've just gone through an election. They have seen a lot of politics on
Mhm.
TV and on the internet, and they may not understand the difference between a presidential election and
Mhm.
the president's role and the national role of Senate and House and all those sorts of things. I think that we do a pretty good job of covering those things. We may not do as good a
Mhm.
job. Um, Not Mr. Daly. Mr. Daly, if you're listening to this, you're great. I'm not knocking you, but I think schools in general do kind of a less complete job of helping students understand what their state and their local representatives do. So, can you tell me a little bit about what your job entails and how that affects the people who live in your town and that you represent?
Sure. So people, even though, like you said, people probably hear more about national politics, especially when there's a presidential election year. They, whether they realize it or not, probably interact more with local governments. So anytime you see a police officer or drive by a fire station or rescue station, anytime you're even walking down the street on a sidewalk or enjoying any of the amenities of the locality where you live, usually in some way that's impacted by local government. So, like I said, I was elected to the Blacksburg Town Council in 2011, and we run all of the areas of local or municipal government. So, some of the things that would include would be police, fire rescue, planning and building, zoning, that sort of thing. So, when someone wants to um, build a new building, for example, that has to go through a series of building inspections, so that's under the town's purview. Or if they want a property rezone so that they could put um, a piece of commercial property where there was residential, for example, that would require going before the Blacksburg Town Council if it were in Blacksburg. We do that. We manage the town's budget, which includes all of those departments. We pass ordinances and resolutions, and those can include um, anything from zoning regulations to right now, for example, we're talking about Airbnb, and we're legalizing Airbnb and trying to come up with regulations of how that will work in the town of Blacksburg. So it kind of runs the gamut. There's a whole range of things that local government is involved in. We don't really, although some local governments are partisan, the Blacksburg Town Council and a lot of town councils and smaller city councils aren't partisan, so I don't run through a primary, that sort of thing. I just run in the general election. Um,
Can you tell us about the size of the council? How many people run for the council? What an election might look like? Maybe we can start by saying, how do you get to be a counselor? And then once you get there, then kind of expanding
sure.
upon what it looks like afterwards.
Sure. So there's, and it's going to vary depending on what locality you're in, but I'll just use Blacksburg as an example because it's what I'm most familiar with. There's 7 members of the Blacksburg Town Council, and that includes the mayor, who is a member of the town council, and it's on staggered terms. Uh, so like next year, for example, there's 3 open seats on the town council that people will run for, and in addition, there's the race for the mayor's seat, which you vote on separately. And then in 2 years from now, I'll be up for re-election, and there'll be 3 more seats. So we have staggered terms, so we're not turning over the entire Blacksburg Town Council all at once. Um, 7 members. It's all nonpartisan, so we're all independents on the town council. And how would you go about doing that? So anyone who's interested in running, basically all they have to do is get 125 signatures. Often you get more. I got 200. You have to fill out economic disclosure paperwork, just so people are aware of any sort of conflicts of interest, that sort of thing. Um, and once you do that, if you meet all the qualifications, you can appear on the ballot, and that's when you start campaigning. So for the months leading up to the election, um, essentially what you have to do is knock on a lot of doors, meet as many people as you can, go to debates and talk to kind of get your message out there, what you want to do with your local government, what your vision is for your community, and what your plans are to improve it. Um,
Thank you.
yeah.
When you were thinking about, did you decide early on that you wanted to be a member of government, or did you say, I think things should be run a little differently than when we're running them, and the way that I can change that is by getting involved, right? Like, what came first here? Chicken or egg?
Uh, hmm. I don't know, probably a little bit of both. I've been interested in politics my entire life. When I was in high school, my mom was very politically active. We lived in Williamsburg, and she would go to Richmond, Virginia, which is the state capital, and kind of advocate for changes to healthcare policy was what she was really interested in. And at that time, I went sometimes with her when I had a day off from school or that sort of thing, and I learned about government at the state level and saw that whereas before I thought that government was something that people on TV did or important
Right.
or wealthy people were involved in, I learned that they were just real people like my mom who could get involved and make a difference. So I took that with me. And when I came to college, I mentioned I got involved with the student paper, the Collegiate Times. I covered the local government beat for the paper, so I started going to town council meetings then, and learned about kind of all the issues. I think they were debating the noise ordinance and what the noise ordinance should be at the time. I covered the town elections. I covered them passing the town budget and what their kind of priorities were for building new things in the town of Blacksburg. So I really got interested in them, and so I ended up deciding to run.
Thank you. So maybe when we talk about, and all of this for our students' sake, these are all cities are going to face, all cities and towns are going to face pretty similar issues, right? And what's going to be different is the resources that you have at your disposal, the types of businesses that are in your community, there are going to be a lot of differences that mean that maybe the same problem might best be served by very different responses to the problem, right? So, whereas with your federal government, you're painting with kind of a wide brush, right? The same solution is going to be applied in 50 states.
Yep.
Whether you're Hawaii and you're an island, or whether you are farmland in Nebraska, you have the same sort of answer to the problem. And in some cases, that may not be an appropriate way to solve the problem. And so one way that is dealt with is by the Constitution, what powers they don't explicitly give to the federal government, they give to the states, and then the states can then hand down to the local governments. Is that correct? So the state would supersede you?
Yeah, so different states handle it differently. Virginia is what's called a Dillon rule state. Dillon was the name of a Supreme Court justice in the 19th century who wrote the majority opinion on a case that determined how state governments and local governments interact. So the federal government and state government, through federalism, if you studied that in a civics class, they share power, but the federal government supersedes them. The relationship between state governments and local governments is such that um, state governments are by default assumed to have all the power, but they enumerate, so they list out, they create a list of what powers are handed over to local governments. So local governments, for example, have um, a significant amount of control over things like zoning and building, that sort of thing. But other types of things like civil rights legislation, for example, is handled at the state level.
Fair enough. Can you tell me a little bit about uh, for our students, we know about the three branches of government. We know that we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and the city council or a town council would be analogous to a legislative branch, right? You're making zoning laws, rule what you don't call them laws, from what it sounded like.
Yeah, they are laws. We call them ordinances.
Okay, yeah. So and the difference between an ordinance and a law would be just
I
who
think
makes it.
Yeah, and ordinance is a law at the local level that like a local city council or town council passes.
Oh,
So,
okay. So you make you make the laws and do those sorts of things. Obviously, we have local courts, so the judicial system kind of makes sense. Can you tell me a little bit about how the executive branch functions? Right, we know that there is a mayor, but the mayor is also on the city council, so that seems very different than.
yep. So there's two different forms of local government. There's probably more than that, but there's two very popular forms. Blacksburg is what's called a council manager form of government. So kind of the legislative policy making decisions is determined by the town council or the city council, and the mayor is the kind of chief legislator. He's the head of um, the policy making body or the governing body.
So
Um,
instead of being an executive branch,
mhm.
he's the head of the legislative branch.
Yep. And then the council itself hires a town manager. Sometimes it's called a town administrator or city administrator, that sort of thing. And that person supervises the heads of the various departments, which would be a part of the executive branch of the government. So the police chief, the head of planning and building, um, the fire and rescue chief, head of engineering and public works and transit, those sort of things would report to that person. So what it does is it kind of separates it out, not necessarily legislative executive, but more policy making on one side and administrative kind of carrying out the policies on the other side is kind of how we more commonly describe it in local government.
Fair enough. So it sounds like because the council holds control of hiring and firing city managers or
Mhm.
the analogous position, that the city council is sort of a combination of both the legislative and the executive branch.
Somewhat, yeah. There is another form of local government called the strong mayor form of government.
Hmm.
And that's common in larger cities like New York or Chicago or even Richmond, Virginia, where you have a city council, and then separate from that, you have the mayor who serves in the executive role, and the mayor supervises the police chief, the head of planning and building, that sort of thing.
Thank you. I think that's wonderful information. When we walk into election day, a lot of our students are, many of our students are 18. Some of them will be 18 very soon. When the next election rolls around, they will have an opportunity to vote, not only in, you know, political races at the state or federal level, but also on their local government. So, could you tell us a little bit about what you think makes a good local representative? And I'm trying to find a way of like not making it into a partisan. This is what you should believe, but more, what are the attributes that make someone a strong a strong legislator for a town?
Sure. So I think you really want to look for someone that shares the values of the community that you're in, and also someone that has a lot of experience and knowledge about local government. And you can gain that through a variety of ways. Before I was elected to the town council, I served on the town's housing board. For example, I was also on his long-range planning committee. And like I mentioned, I covered local government for the student paper. So what you want to look for, like Blacksburg, for example, one of our shared community values is sustainability. So if that was something that you really cared about, you would look for candidates that supported sustainability and had that as part of their platform, or that was an issue that they were talking about, for example. Um, and another thing you look at is experience, like I mentioned, the experience I had, but people who are involved in the community in other ways, whether that's serving on a nonprofit board or being involved with community organizations like the YMCA, for example, or that sort of thing, or who really have something to offer or a different perspective to their local government. I think that that's really important.
So for our students who might be interested in moving into local government, then what you're saying is get involved, like now,
Yeah.
get involved now, and help out. Maybe as a city council person, a town council. Is it the town of Blacksburg? It's the town, right?
Yep. So this is unique to Virginia. Town or cities, it has nothing to do with population. It's whether you're inside a county or separate from a county.
Okay.
So we're a town because we're part of Montgomery County. Nearby Radford, even though it has a smaller population, is a city because it's not a part of a county.
Fair enough. So for the town of Blacksburg, um, if you were going to tell someone how they can help their town moving forward, what are some things that you might tell them to do? Obviously, you can't tell us about, because we have students that are in Sandusky, Cleveland. We're talking to people right now in Columbus. We're talking to people in, across the state. So we obviously it would be impossible, not only for me, and I know a lot of these places, I know a lot of these kids, but it would definitely be impossible for us to kind of dissect what most needs to be helped in each town, or where they can do good. But what are some things to look for when you want to do good, when you want to become involved? What are some places that you can look to help a town or a city?
Well, one, you can go and speak to your current city or town council members. That's a great way. Like I said, when I first got involved in local or in politics when I was in high school, with my mom, I learned that politicians are people you can just go up to and speak to and talk to them about issues. So that would be one way to find out. Another is to read the news and pay attention to the local issues that are happening in your community. That's a great way to stay involved, especially for people who are just becoming voting age. Staying up on current events is very important. It often gives you the best information of how you can, of who you'd want to vote for, who you would want to support in a local election, that sort of thing. But there's other ways too that you can find out what is needed in your community, like local nonprofit groups, for example, are often really involved. There's a whole slew of them in Blacksburg, like Sustainable Blacksburg, which is concerned about environmental issues, or the Downtown Merchants Group, which is working on downtown revitalization and improving our downtown in Blacksburg, or the YMCA, which is offering community service opportunities for people. So those would be other ways to get involved. Often communities also have strategic goals or a comprehensive plan which says where they see themselves in the future. That's often a thing to look for and kind of read and review and kind of find out how do I fit within that future.
Thanks. So maybe when you said go and talk to your representatives,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is probably a good time to reemphasize how you can do that. Obviously, you can talk to them face to face. If you're talking about a town or a city council, you can do it at meetings, council meetings. And can you tell us what a city council meeting looks like and what you do in city council meetings?
Sure. So you can actually look at all you might want to do this for your own local government instead of the town of Blacksburg. But Blacksburg, for example, records all of its meetings, so you can go and look online on what a typical meeting would look like. But often a local government meeting, they'll post before the meeting the agenda and copies of whatever ordinances or laws that are going to be up for discussion or debate. And the meeting will often be broken into several parts. Often there'll be a consent agenda in the beginning, and the consent agenda is when you discuss you don't really discuss. You approve things that are fairly routine, like the minutes from the previous meeting or setting the date that a public hearing will be had. So often that happens first. And then during the meeting, you have a series of public hearings. And then in each public hearing, there's usually a presentation from the town or city staff about what sort of issue you're talking about. Then there's an opportunity for the public to come forward and share their opinion on whatever issue is before you. Then there's discussion from the town or city council members, and then a vote. So you go through public hearings about each individual issue, and then at the end of the meeting, there's another citizen comment section where anyone could come forward with any issue that they have before the town council, and usually speak for a certain period of time. In Blacksburg, for example, it's about 3 minutes that you have to speak. Often at city council meetings, there's like the mayor might issue a proclamation to declare it Early Childhood Education Month, for example, or something like that. And there'll be resolutions. There might be other kind of presentations from the town staff about kind of upcoming issues that aren't a part of a public hearing. For example, our town staff recently gave us a presentation on the upcoming capital budget that we'll be voting on in the next couple of months. So there's that. Yeah, so there's plenty of opportunity for anyone to get involved and kind of speak their mind on issues. And if you're really passionate about an issue and it's coming up before a city council or local government, you don't have to wait till the actual meeting to talk to them about it. Often the contact information for your local government representatives is right on the local government's website. And often, since they have to campaign and be visible in the community, they have other ways of getting in touch with them, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, that sort of thing also.
So let's say that I want to change your mind on an issue. Let's say, let's pretend like Blacksburg is considering like everyone has to have a cat policy or something. I don't know. Just make something up bizarre.
Let's go with the cat policy.
Okay, everyone has to have a cat, and I'm allergic to cats, and cats are awful. Sorry, guys, they are. Cats are terrible, terrible people.
It would be great if a cat just emerged right here.
Just right over your right shoulder, just glared at me, just with hateful eyes, just to really drive it home. So let's say that you're doing this policy, and I have a very, very strong opinion, or I have a lot of really good evidence that I want to present. I want to change your mind about your position. Is it better to tweet at you? Is it better to go on Facebook? Is it better to call in? What sort of weight does contact have, and is it different based on the platform?
Yeah, well, I would think kind of one-on-one interaction, whether that's on the phone or at a meeting or sending me a message, whether it's an email or Facebook message, that sort of thing. I think I put more weight on those sorts of issues than I do getting a petition where it has 50 signatures on it or something like that. You just don't know how much effort people put into it. But when people come to you that are really passionate about an issue, I think that definitely has the most weight.
And so,
not that petitions are bad. We get petitions all the time, but
fair enough. Yeah, because I was just sitting here going, okay, I am better than 50 people if I just show up for 5 minutes, right? And I think that's honestly important for students to know, is that writing your name on a piece of paper versus showing up and letting them know that you're a real person, that this is my voice, this is my face. I mean, when you go into my classroom and you look in the little vlog section, you go, well, 2 weeks ago he was talking about doing this in block 4, right? There's a reason I do those. There's a reason that I put my face and you hear my voice. I want you to know who I am. I want you to know that I care about what I'm doing. And so I make sure that you can associate it with me, and that it has the weight of it. It's harder for me to go back on something or to say I didn't do something or I don't intend to do something. When you've got my picture, you've got my voice, it feels like more of a promise to my students as far as content. In that same way, I've got to assume that when you see someone walking into a meeting and they've been there 2 weeks and they're saying, okay, here's this other thing I've got going, here's this other piece of evidence I want to bring to your attention, I have to think that it holds a certain weight. Not only having an opinion,
Definitely.
but becoming involved. Is data, and I'm gonna ask a loaded question here, because Do you feel like coming to you with numbers or coming to you with anecdotes is more important? And maybe we shouldn't say to you. Maybe that's not fair. Maybe we should say to their city council in general. Is it better to come with anecdotes or is it better to come with data?
I think both are good. I'm sometimes more persuaded by data. That just might be my personality. Other council members might give you a different answer to that question. With anecdotes, sometimes you get one person's perspective, but with data, sometimes you get hundreds of people's perspective. For example,
The
when we were
math
talking,
teacher likes to hear that, by the way. That's, come with data, guys. Come with numbers.
so for example, right now we're talking about Airbnb regulations, and this is something that every probably local government in the United States is either dealing with now or has to deal with in the next probably couple of years. So Airbnb is a website for people who don't know where you can rent out your house temporarily, sort of like it's a bed and breakfast or a hotel, that sort of thing. And often, when the website first started, local governments, their zoning laws weren't um, ready for kind of commercial activity in a residential area. And there were problems caused by people who, not just people who were just renting out just a bedroom in their house, but were abusing the website. They were purchasing up properties and then turning entire houses into full-time Airbnb houses, which basically became a hostel in the middle of a residential neighborhood and caused lots of neighbors to come out and complain. So when we first came out to do regulations, as you can imagine, anyone who was using Airbnb, of which there's probably 300 people in Blacksburg, called
That's
wind of
actually
it.
way more than I thought it would be.
Oh yeah, I think you can go to Airbnb.com/Blacksburg or whatever and
Fair enough.
see how there are right now. Um, so when people came to us, what I felt was more for example, what became the big sticking point in the regulations was how many days should you be allowed to use cumulatively throughout the year Airbnb? Should you be able to rent out your bedroom? And the council really struggled with coming up with a number of days that would allow people to use the website meaningfully, and then, but at the same time, prevent kind of these worst case scenarios. And as we were discussing that, we got lots of anecdotes from people, but they weren't as helpful as you would think they would be, because often they came from extremes. Like one gentleman said he rents out his place like 200 days a year, and he made like $30,000 a year off of using Airbnb. I don't really know how that's possible. If I find out, I'll let you know.
Fair enough.
But
So that
some
was
of
like
the
his job, basically.
yeah, some of those anecdotes that people came with that were where they were most concerned and most passionate about it, those didn't represent what most people who were using the website were doing. So having data, polling people, for example, that use the website of how many days a year do you rent out a bedroom, that sort of thing, which we did get the local kind of sharing economy community to do, kind of helped us draft the legislation better.
And can you tell me a little bit about how that legislation is being written? Because now you got me curious. How many days can you rent your place?
It hasn't passed yet. The and it every time we discuss it, it seems like it changes. The current draft of the ordinance breaks it up into two separate cases. One case is where you're remaining in your home and renting out um, one or two bedrooms at a time, but you remain as the host in your residence,
Okay.
and you can do that up to 90 days a year. The other case is where you rent out your entire home. So in a college town like Blacksburg, that would be um, most common during graduation, football, home games, that sort of thing. But you vacate your house and you rent out your entire house, and that would be allowed up to 30 days.
Can so follow up question, just because I'm curious, not because it's meaningful to our students, probably. Sorry, guys. Uh, can you do you get both? Do you get like 120
Yeah,
days
so
total?
it's 90 days total. 30 of those days can be whole day rental. So the way it's currently
Ah,
written, it can be 90 days. I believe the mayor and one other council member wanted it to be um, 90 days plus the additional 30 days. What's probably the version which I outlined is probably what's going to pass. we'll probably look at it in a year or two to see how it's working and not working, and revise the numbers after that. It's also likely that the General Assembly, which is the state legislature, will take up this issue. They attempted to take up the issue last year, and were not successful. They did actually create a bill that passed, but it required it to be reauthorized the next year, and it's not going to be reauthorized this year. That's way too much technical information than you ever wanted. But it's possible the
No,
General
that's good. That's good.
will get its act together and come up with statewide regulations.
Sure.
They did that for Uber several years ago. Um, and if that happened, that would it one of two things would happen. Either our current ordinance would be grandfathered in and allowed, or it would supersede our ordinance. And I don't know how many days that they're looking at.
Yeah, I think we're kind of in an interesting era, right? Because we are changing the way that the world works. When you look at the time in which many laws were passed, the ability to immediately transfer information across the country, let alone the world, was not even remotely possible. You could have a phone call, but there's no way you could send documents. There's no way that you could make business agreements, you know, let alone be able to take a look at 15 different places to stay, pick one out, sign it in 10 minutes. Like, this is the difference between what we could do and what we can do now is crazy. And I think it's very interesting to look at how government is trying to keep up with that in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
There have been some really interesting pieces of legislation that I don't want to go into. I want to go into privately before I take it out of this, because they're about some sensitive topics about that affect with data and individuals who are legally minors, right? So there've been a lot of interesting cases where laws haven't caught up with what's going on, and that's had some huge ramifications for minors by just where they misuse their cell phones, and now they're in legal trouble. Can you tell me a little bit about?
That would probably be state law, so I don't have to deal with that.
Okay, fair enough. But can you tell me a little bit about as you move forward? Like, you don't want to hit Uber separately and then Airbnb separate. You know, you want to at some point you want to start looking at that this cycle of things that are changing, and find a process by which you can very quickly adapt to what's going on, and churn these things out so that it's not a hindrance to your everyday operations, right?
Yeah. So the laws are often they change later than when society changes. So laws are often trying to keep up. So Blacksburg, its zoning ordinances didn't anticipate the sharing economy, or that people would want to. Like, we certainly allow long-term rentals, 6 months or 12 months, because it's a
Sure.
college town. But we didn't anticipate that people would use a website to rent out for a day or two, similar to what you would do in a hotel. And certainly our laws need to catch up with the sharing economy. It's becoming a bigger and bigger thing, whether it's Uber, Lyft, or Airbnb, or those sorts of things, or even websites where you're doing freelancing or performing a service.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these seem to be finding ways of allowing individuals to get goods and services out, right? And so, I guess is this something that's more of a commerce issue? I guess with Airbnb, particularly zoning, right? But is that a unique case? Do you think more of those will fall under the purview of zoning versus commerce versus?
I think Airbnb might be a unique case. Something like Uber, for example, I think you can come up easily with a set of regulations that work at the state level. Airbnb is different because it affects different communities in different ways. So a place that has a lot of tourism, for example, is going to get a lot of pushback from hotels that don't want the competition of their business. Whereas we don't have that we do have hotels. We haven't heard from them as a part of the Airbnb discussion, but it affects different communities differently. And it also has an effect on the housing market. If people are purchasing up houses, depending on how you write the regulations, it could cause people to want to purchase houses to use as full-time Airbnbs, like I mentioned, and that makes housing more expensive for other people. So I think it is important for local governments to deal with that. Whereas, like I mentioned, that there's 300 Airbnb hosts in Blacksburg, in a smaller town, which once, not that Blacksburg doesn't want more tourism, but in a smaller town that doesn't have as much tourism or people coming to it, they might want looser regulations with Airbnb so that they can bring in more people into the community. Whereas Blacksburg, we're having trouble catching up just by the sheer amount of it.
Fair enough. So, so we've gone through a little bit about how you get to be, how you kind of decide that you want to be in politics, how that, maybe a kind of a basic path that you would get to be participating in local government. We talked a little bit about what, on a limited case, what your city town council does because you're inside of a county. See, we learned that too. And we've talked a little bit about how you reach your senator and those sorts of things, or not senator, your city council, your town council. So, would you be able to speak a little bit towards some of the differences between city and state government? Could you talk to us a little bit about, and if there's something that's out of your, so, ladies and gentlemen who are watching, something that's really, really important that you need to be able to say, even as a math teacher, especially as a math teacher, because you don't remember every formula ever, is I honestly don't know the answer to that question. And so I normally follow that up with, let's look it up, or let's search for an answer. And sometimes that's truthful, and I really don't know the answer. And sometimes I want you to look up that information and have those skills. But we really may go into territory that Mr. Suffin has no idea about, or is not
Very
able to give us a good answer to. So that's very important, especially as someone who's a representative of a state, which I am. I am a teacher. I'm employed by the state of Ohio. I am employed through our online district, right? So in many ways, when I'm talking to you, when I'm emailing with you, when we're in a jigsaw, I'm representing more than just myself. And so he also has that going on, right? He's not just a representative for himself; he's a representative for his town, and to a lesser extent, his state and his, And so we really do appreciate you coming out and talking to us because it is a cool thing that you do. You have a job, right? You have I guess I want to use Quotey Finger's regular job, but I think city council, there are a lot of city and town councils across the country. That's a pretty regular thing too. Can I just ask, is it possible to be just a city councilor or a town council member? Is that something where you could make enough money to live, to pay rent?
No, it doesn't pay rent. Town council pays $9,000 a year. Well, I guess depending on where your rent is, but the amount it pays is below the poverty line, so people usually don't do it as their full-time job. Unless they're retired, I think all of the town council members are involved in other things. One of them is actually a math teacher at Virginia Tech. For example, one owns a local business. So all of our council members are involved in the community in other ways. Like I mentioned, I'm work at the vet school on campus at Virginia Tech.
Yeah. And so this isn't something you don't, especially local politics, maybe I should clarify that. You don't become a city council member or a town council member for the money, just like you don't become a math teacher for the money. There are lots of wonderful reasons to do it. It is not that you're taking home the big bucks, right?
Yeah. Even at the state level in Virginia, it might be different in Ohio.
I honestly don't know. I don't know what the wages are, and I should.
Yeah, so like a state legislator, so our state legislature is broken up sort of like Congress has a House of Representatives and a Senate. Sure. Virginia has a House of Delegates, it's called, and a state Senate. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's in the ballpark if you make about $18,000 a year to do that. So often those people have other jobs too. They're attorneys or business owners or that sort of thing also. So there's a very strong tradition in Virginia. I don't know if it's true in other states to have part-time legislators.
Yeah. Mr. Daly, get on that. Let us know. I'm gonna I'm gonna push pass that baton to our social studies teacher to kind of fill as one of our two social studies teachers. Sorry, it's just he's much more likely to be watching this because I make him so that he can make sure I'm not doing totally stupid stuff. Um, so these are not people who are. This is their job. This is their sole job. This is not people who are doing it for the glamour. I'm assuming. I'm assuming it's
No.
not super glamorous. Um, let's say that you wanted to. Let's say that you wanted to be a public servant in a way that you could. That would be your whole role, right?
Mhm.
And let's say you don't want to do it as being a math teacher, as an example. What are
Mhm.
some other roles and some other positions that people play that are maybe this is a 45 hour a week full time sort of position?
Yeah, so there's like executive directors of nonprofits, like I named a few earlier. Like let's just take Downtown Blacksburg Inc. for example. That would be a full-time job where you're serving the local community. In that case, your role is to serve as a conduit between the downtown merchants and the local government, and also build community within the downtown merchants, find ways to support local businesses. So that would be an example of a job that is a full-time position where you could serve your community. Of course, there's also the administrative staff within the local government. If you're not interested in campaigning or running in elections, you can work for local governments. Like I mentioned, we supervise the town manager. We also supervise the town attorney and a town clerk. So if you're an attorney and you can also work for local governments, there's planners, police officers. Those are all ways to serve local governments and have a full-time job also.
So one thing that I've been trying to do throughout this series of um, I don't know what to call them. I guess streams, shows, whatever, is talk a little bit about the different paths that you can have after high school, right? So you
Mhm.
leave here and then you go do other things. Is this a sort of path as a city councilor where you need to have a particular degree? Where okay, you were in journalism. Do you need to be in journalism or government, or is there?
Nope. Yeah, you don't need a particular degree to be on the town council, that sort of thing. Our mayor has a master's degree in history from Virginia Tech, for example. I mentioned Susan Anderson, who's a math instructor at Virginia Tech. She has a degree in mathematics, obviously. One of our council members, Cecile Newcomb, didn't go to college, and she was elected to the town council. And she's recently gone back to college and is studying urban planning, and recently completed her bachelor's degree in that. Um, there's others who've studied economics or all sorts of subjects. So there's no education requirements. Obviously, going to school, going to college in a particular area can help kind of inform your decision making.
Sure.
But there's many paths to local government.
So what you're saying is that learning how to fix the problems is much more important than what the piece of paper says.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
I would say so, definitely.
Okay. I know that a lot of our students want to look into college, and a lot of our students don't. You know, there are, you know, like and or maybe you want to look into a 4 year school, maybe you want to look into a 2 year or a trade school, maybe you want to look into direct employment. A lot of our, maybe not speaking to the students I have now because a lot of my students are a little younger in their high school careers, but students I've worked with previously have situations where maybe they have family obligations where they, you know, being able to help bring in income and help family support family it becomes an important thing immediately. Um, and I guess it's kind of nice to know that sort of responsibility, saying, okay, this is something where I need to help take care of people. Not only does that not exclude you from being able to be involved in your local politics, but that may be something that makes you a valuable addition to, you know, to maybe city council or town council, but also the other branches of your local government, because that's what their job is to do. Their job is to take care of their town, you know. And if you come in and have the ability to show that you can do those things, that you have experience doing those things, that could be an asset. It's the word I'm looking
Oh,
for.
yeah, definitely. I think kind of one of the, I guess before I was elected, I would have guessed that the most important thing to make a healthy council was that they agreed on the issues so that they could move forward on them. But I think now what is actually the most important thing is to have a diversity of perspectives on a council. That's what makes it healthy. I think our Blacksburg Council is healthy because it has people from that offer different viewpoints and different perspectives. But Someone who didn't go to college and instead learned a trade, I think that they could certainly be involved just as much as someone who went on to get a PhD in a particular subject. They all offer different perspectives and valuable perspectives to local government.
Okay, I appreciate that. So, see, now I've got like a host of questions about because we have a single party in control of uh, Senate, House, and the presidency. That
Mm-hmm.
presents an interesting question coming off your previous one, but I'm going to do my best to avoid uh, national politics. I don't, because honestly, I think our students are more I guess knowledgeable is probably the best word, but more aware. There we go of federal politics, so it's not as helpful to them. So I'm going to throw the math angle at you
Okay.
because I just we talked a little bit, and I know that we wanted to focus more on what do you do, how do those sorts of things help you. Um, do you deal with a lot of statistics in your job? I know that you work with a budget. Can you tell me a little bit? Do you feel like what's oh man, see, and now this is saved forever, right? It's just me
You want
stuttering
me to
on.
talk about math? Is that the question?
Yeah, how do you use math, and specifically for my students who may complain about having to do a stats unit or complain about having to do block four, whatever area it is. What sorts of math do you find to be most helpful for the job that you're doing?
Certainly statistics. We often get reports from whether it's town staff or from a third party where we've commissioned to report on things like affordable housing or economic development in the town of Blacksburg, and that includes lots of numbers and statistics, and you have to be able to read a chart and understand that sort of thing. Even when looking at trying to make a policy decision on something, um, one thing we talked a lot about in the past year was this might be overly technical, but density bonuses. That's where within a certain zoning district, if you do something that's beneficial to the local government, we'll give you something in return. In this case, you get to have a more dense development. So whether that's increasing the height or allowing more bedrooms per acre, that sort of thing. Um, and so you have to be able to kind of read and interpret information to be able to understand those sorts of things. And like you mentioned, the town budget, um, while large portions of it are narrative, a lot of it's numbers too. You have to be able to understand um, pie charts, line items within a budget, that sort of thing.
And so maybe so can I, not because I'm wanting to zone more into math as much as just because I'm curious. So maybe how do you build a budget? Does your force does your police chief say this is what we need to be able to operate next year, or is that handed by somebody else? How do you build that?
Sure. So the chief person who's in charge of it is the town manager's office. So whether it's the town manager or the deputy town manager, one of those folks. And the budget process is all year long. You're never not somewhere in the budget process, even though it has to be approved by the start of the fiscal year, which is July 1st. You're spending the entire year coming up with strategic goals of what you want to do and where you want to be as a government. So the process is first you come up with those goals, um, then you go to and I'll just say what ours are. Like our primary goal within the budget is to um, maintain our existing infrastructure for our capital budget, for example, and then meet certain targeted needs that are essential parts of the government, whether that's police, fire and rescue, that sort of thing. Um, So you have your set of goals, and then you go to the individual departments and you ask them to come up with their individual budget. There's one very large budget document, which is maybe uh, 300 pages, that sort of thing. But it's broken up into individual budgets, whether it's the town manager's office, the police. We'll just use the police, for example. So the entire town budget is in the ballpark of around $61 million. The police budget is $8 million within that. So that would include things like um, salaries for police officers, their equipment, costs for fuel for their cars, paying for new cars and new pieces of equipment, um, that sort of thing, and programs for community programs, whether that's school resource officers, that sort of thing. Um, so we would go to the police chief, or that a representative from the town manager's office would go to the police chief and say, here's using last year's budget as a benchmark. What are some areas where you need additional resources? What are some areas where we can be more efficient by consolidating different parts of it? And then come up with a proposal. And from each department, the proposals all come to the town manager's office, and they look at kind of the big picture issues, like at our current tax rate and with our current resources, what are the priorities that we're able to pay for? Then it goes before the town council for discussion and debate. Different communities deal with their budgets in different ways. In some communities, the budget is more controversial than it would be in Blacksburg, because this is just, I don't know if this is getting too much into national politics, but college towns tend to be more left-leaning.
I think that's it's a number, right? That's just, it can be shown mathematically true, right? So as a math teacher, I think it's fine. I'll allow it.
College towns tend to be more left-leaning, which for local government means that they care more about zoning and land use. So people are going to be more upset about, or more concerned or more interested in whether there's a big box store going near their neighborhood would bring out more people to come out to a meeting than discussions about what the current tax rate is, for example. That doesn't mean that they don't have those discussions. It just means that that's what people are more interested in.
I have a follow-up question, and this goes back to something we had been talking about previously. You had said something about and I apologize because I'm going way back now. We talked about Uber, and we talked about how, okay, the resolution passed for 1 year, but it wasn't going to be re-upped. So I remember this year that there was a proposed tax in Delaware, where I am, Delaware, Ohio, not like the state. And the proposed tax was to work with infrastructure. There's a narrow underpass for a railroad track, right? And it's one lane going each direction, a 2-lane road, and it is a big bottleneck. So they had proposed a tax that would give them the funding to develop that infrastructure, make a new underpass, widen it to 4 lanes. And the groups that were fighting against it, I thought, which was very interesting, was that the reason they fought, one of the selling points of the other side, and I am not advocating for a particular side. It has already failed to pass, so it doesn't matter. Is that it's a permanent tax, right? It was not set to go away. And I thought that was interesting, the idea of a permanent tax, because I feel like there's no such thing as a permanent tax.
Yeah, you can change the tax rate in a year.
Yeah.
It's more likely that the tax rate would go up than it would go down. That is true.
Right. So when they say it's a permanent tax, what they mean is that this tax doesn't have an expiration date written into this piece of legislation.
Yeah.
Not that a tax is forever. And I think
You can't
that's
do
an
that.
important distinction.
Roanoke, Virginia, which is near Blacksburg, increased their meals tax 1 cent to pay for something. I don't remember what it was, but it had an expiration date. It was only for a certain, like a year or 2 years, and then had to be reauthorized, and it was not. So it is possible to do that with things like infrastructure projects. So now I'm not remembering if I think this was 2 years ago in Blacksburg. Since I've been on the town council, we've only changed the real estate tax rate once. It went up 3 cents. So it's just to explain the numbers a little bit. Your property taxes, you pay um, a set number of cents based on $100 of assessed property value. In Blacksburg, it's 25 cents. It was 22 cents, and that was to pay for a new rescue squad station.
Hmm.
And you think that's a one-time purchase. It costs $7 million to build the um, new station. Why do you need the money for a longer period of time? But infrastructure projects specifically, it's not just a one-time purchase. Someone has to maintain the building, you have to staff the building, that sort of thing. So there's continuing costs anytime you do infrastructure. Even something like an overpass has continuing costs associated with it.
See, yeah, that is a much more insightful. And we kind of live in the era of 144 characters, or what is it? 100 is it 144?
I think 140. I don't
140.
know.
I don't know. Maybe I'm giving them a couple extra on the end. So we live in a time of sound bites and small blurbs, right? And there's a lot more nuance. There should be a lot more nuance to many of the things that we do, and that presents an interesting challenge in the modern day. Um, do you find that this um, that maybe lack of this understanding of nuance has has caused you any trouble, or the town council any trouble when you're trying to present an issue to the public?
Yeah, we could use the recent discussions about Airbnb, for example. Like there were headlines and information shared that said town of Blacksburg trying to do new strict regulations on Airbnb, that sort of thing. So we had all these people coming out and emailing us about it. A lot of times people just read the headline and the tweet, but don't read the actual specifics. So, for example, in Blacksburg, our zoning ordinance doesn't allow Airbnb how it's written now. We're actually trying to legalize it to make it something that people can do. So we're trying to have the laws catch up with what people are already doing.
As a journalist, does that hurt you that they just read the headline? Does it
Yeah.
just a little bit?
And
Yeah.
newspapers, as you know, have, or any sort of media has had major staffing issues, cutbacks. So local government especially isn't covered as much by the media. We are lucky that we've had someone from the Roanoke Times, which is our local paper, cover our meetings pretty thoroughly recently. But there have been stretches of times where we do things and then I don't read about it anywhere, which is um, alarming. But
Well,
when,
how does that work? Let's say that you change an ordinance that affects many people, right?
Mhm,
Maybe it's a zoning thing. Maybe it's making, as an
mhm,
example, making Airbnb technically legal, right? Like,
mhm.
okay, this is now something you can do. Here's how you can do it. How do you get
Yeah.
that information out to the people who are not visiting the city website and who
Mhm.
are not, if it's not being covered in the papers? How do you do that?
Yeah, so there's several things that you can do. Obviously, all of the members of the town council, we've run for office, so we've met a lot of people, so we can tell as many people as we know about an issue that's coming up for discussion or debate. If it's something like a rezoning request, the town does. We send letters and postcards to everyone within a certain radius of the area that's affected, so that all the neighbors that would be affected by something know about it. So we do things like that so that people do know about something that will affect them. We also hold neighborhood meetings, that sort of thing. We reach out to kind of existing organizations and groups, whether it's a like a homeowners association or an interest group that cares a lot about a particular issue.
Fair enough. I really appreciate you meeting with me. Um, so we've had you for about an hour, and if it's okay with you, what I'd love to do is if students have follow up questions, maybe I can send them to you
Sure.
to have them followed up with. Um, so I just really appreciate the glimpse into what is such an important function such an important system inside of our towns and cities that just they don't get talked about. And when you talk about, okay, they're not being covered in the papers, well, I want to make sure that our students get to learn about it somewhere because they don't see it,
Hmm.
and a lot of our homes don't have subscriptions to newspapers anymore. Maybe they have a digital subscription. Maybe they just read their so many free articles a week. Maybe they get most of their stuff
Hmm.
off Twitter and Facebook. In the last presidential election, don't quote me on this, but I am I read a piece on that the most likely news source that people got their presidential election news was Facebook.
Hmm. And that's not bad if people are sharing things on Facebook that are from credible news sources.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a lot of fake news and a lot of articles that are coming from one different ideological or partisan bend, and a lot of people don't know how to distinguish between those, especially when it shows up. Like something that won the Pulitzer Prize that was in the New York Times will show up, looks exactly the same on your Facebook news feed as something from a website that isn't actually hiring journalists. They're just writing fake stories.
Well, can I pick your brain a little bit as a? I don't want to call you an ex-journalist, but as no longer
Ex-journalists is fine.
as someone who's previously in journalism,
Hmm.
how can our students best decide whether or not, and there's no like this is the three steps and then you're good, but what are some things that our students need to do when they're reading a news source to think about how much weight to put on that piece of information?
One thing is to look at whether you're reading um, a news story or an opinion. Newspapers, let's say the Washington Post, for example, publish both. They have news stories which just straight report the facts and what's going on, what's happening. These stories might analyze the situation to put it in context, but they don't. The reporter doesn't inject their own opinion, and then they publish things like op-eds and columns and that sort of thing, which which offers a perspective, one person's perspective. So it's important to read both, I think, to find out what the news is, what the facts are, what's happening, and then read from a variety of different perspectives how other people are interpreting that information. Some people, when they see articles or links that are shared on social media, they don't look to check whether what they're reading is opinion or whether it's news. It's important to understand that, to place what you're reading in context. It's also important to know what the source of the information is. Um,
Is seeing something like blank Times or blank Post, right? Is that going to be a better news source for students than something that is not a newspaper or something that?
um, well, it really depends. Like, I get a lot of political news from Politico, which is a website which covers um, national and state politics. And that's not associated with the traditional newspaper. So there's more news sources that are moving over to um, their kind of standalone websites, that sort of thing. So that's fine. But it's important to know kind of what it is what your news source is that you're doing. That doesn't mean that the like New York Times, Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, those sort of things are bad. Those are actually some of the absolute best sources for news and information, in my opinion. It's just you have to understand what it is you're reading. You could look at things like circulation numbers or awards, how their peers within the journalism industry view that particular publication or that particular media source can help um, learn about the credibility of what you're reading.
So what you're saying is that it's not enough just to read a news story. It's also important to know how reliable your source is.
Yeah, definitely.
And and this goes also for when you're spreading information. This
Hmm.
goes doubly for when you're spreading information, guys. When you share a link that goes to misinformation, you are you're hurting. You're not helping, right? Like this is that's not to say that you shouldn't spread news, that you shouldn't spread information. You should. That is a really important way that you can become involved in local events. But you have to understand the value of what you're sharing. You have to understand the goals and the motivation of what you're sharing. If you're sharing an opinion piece, that's very different than sharing a piece that is, here's the information. This is how many people did this. This runs all the statistics. You know, there is value in sharing scientific articles versus sharing the news summary of a scientific article, and those are very different. A scientific article is going to be much more accurate about the scope of what it says. It might say, okay, in rats with this particular genetic disposition, then cancer rates went up by this tenth of this percent. And then the news article may say this causes cancer, which may not be, which may be an extrapolation of the data, but it may or may not be a fair extrapolation of the data. So it's important to look at both and to know what you're doing. Sorry, I got a little preachy there. But just know what you're sharing, because people trust you. You have people that rely and trust you. And if I gave you bad information about math, I would be doing my job badly. So my job is to give you the most accurate information I can about everything math, and if you decide to weigh in on politics or news, these sorts of things, it's important to remember that you're taking on that role and that responsibility, that the things you share should be accurate. So I guess I'll drop it down to that. I very much appreciate you being here. I think it's very cool what you do. I've always thought it's very cool with what you do. And I have been meaning to pick your brain about it for a long time. So I'm glad I have a good excuse to do it now. So thank you so much for being here. And I hope everybody has a wonderful night. Good night, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.